Hi, this is the video for Monday, February the 22nd. And I'm making this video in my closet and I'm hiding from my children because it is difficult to get work done when you have a 3-year-old who wants to play with you all the time. So there we are. And I'm leaving that instead of trying to find another time to record it because actually it kind of works beautifully with this idea of poetry. We are starting poetry today. And I'm going to try to start from a space that is really meaningful to me and a space that is idea-based, rather than just launching into devices, launching into line endings. We will do that. But this first week, our first intro to poetry, is really just about trying to appreciate what it is doing, why it exists in the world, and then look at some ways that authors are grappling with that idea. You will have read a number of poems for today's class. We won't discuss them all. Often I'm going to give you a lot so that you get exposure and repetition with similar themes. Today I'll be modeling the analysis of one particular poem, and I'll ask you to go to another couple of poems and try to make meaning of them. So every day I encourage you to do all of the reading and bring them into our discussion, but do know I won't be going over every single poem in lots of detail. The title of the unit, this small unit, is The Language We Will Never Speak. And that is a direct quote from one of the poems that you read for today that we'll look at. So our icebreaker, I'm going to say it here. If you're in class, we're going to go into this very deep icebreaker. Where words fail us, that is where poetry lives. But a lot of things live in that world, that space. What? What also lives in the space between understanding and language? Poetry is inserted into a really difficult limbic space where we don't exactly know how to describe a deep feeling. A lot of things, though, that are really important are right there with it. It is what the entirety of the world of art is for. Art in all of its forms. Music lives here. Dancing. All of these expressions accomplish what poetry tries to accomplish, which is express something that we don't exactly know how to describe. Why doesn't poetry say exactly what it means? If it's a good poem, it can't, because the subject it has chosen is difficult to describe. So that's the sort of takeaway from our icebreaker challenge, which it's not the real icebreaker. We needed to have a simpler one. This is really the intro discussion. I'm going to show you to start a poem that I wrote to try to capture this feeling. And I'll tell you the story just to give it some context about my son and I. We were sitting on the ground in the spring looking at flowers, and he wanted to know everything about them. And I'm trying to describe it, and I'm trying to give him language for it, and I'm trying to understand it myself. And it occurred to me, I'm losing words. I've limited myself in my understanding of botany, and so I only have so much to say before I've run out. And he says why, and I say, I don't know. And there was the poem for me. All right, so it's called Vicarious. I really don't know much about flowers. These violets, I know they are born in spring and that they are purple and small. Some are big, I don't know why. But with you I am not embarrassed. I drop down. See this here, I say, the purple spreads out like iris dye on medieval stained glass, cells of itself lighting up on the path. And this is the stamen, and this the stem, and this is the part where the bloom is born, to stretch silk arms to the sky and the sun. It fills each vein like a brook swells with rain, enlivened, alive, realized, for the bees, bristled and humming to the font of life, giving pollen, fuzzing their little knees. I mean, if they have knees, the bees. Only metaphors have stuck with me, but I must try. You could be a botanist, a lover of violets. You're turning it with careful hands. I'm sorry about this. There is much to teach you, and much of it I don't know. It's sweet that you think I do. I'm sorry for the day you will see how at one point I reached the end of what I know about flowers. Start where I leave off. It's not that I want you to be greater than anyone else, just greater than me. So for me, the poem has some things that I'm trying to do, some devices I'm attempting. But for today, just trying to focus on the soul of it, which is that I found a moment in myself where I was failing in a way that felt important and necessary to capture. Failure, but not in the negative connotation we've come to see it. Failure in just a really human, authentically living way. I believe that is what our poems are trying to do today. So we're going to look at one in particular, and we're going to look with these standards in mind. The fifth standard in the AP language literature world is poetry. It's figurative language. So the first two are what we'll focus on this week. Distinguish between the literal and figurative meanings of words and phrases, and then explain the function of specific words and phrases in a text. Both of these must be aimed at reading with a purpose, and so our purpose will be, what is the message these words and phrases try to communicate? First, how weird are these standards? If you just look at them, distinguish between the literal and figurative meanings of words and phrases, explain what specific words and phrases mean. These seem really simple in some ways. We do this all the time. If I told you to take a word from Good Country People and evaluate it, you would find one, you would do it with success. So why are they making such a big deal of it here in the standards for poetry? When applied to poetry, this standard can freeze people up. The words in poetry can be more obscure, more mysterious. We can still evaluate the use of a word, but we tend to get tight. Not everybody, but a lot of students that I've taught in the past, enough that I'm addressing it. We lose confidence. Here are the things that trip people up. There are 4. I'll talk about 3 today. We lose confidence because we lose focus on our purpose. We get distracted from the purpose, which is about what is the message. We get thrown off by the line endings. We stop at the end of the phrase, stop at the end of the line, and we stop our thinking. It disrupts the flow of our thought. And then complex sentences with meandering antecedents throw us off. So we're going to eliminate one of the barriers, and then we're going to tackle the other 2. All right, so we lose focus on our purpose. I'm going to give you this poem, and we're going to evaluate it together. The purpose is, what is the message of this poem? What is Charles Wright, he's covered by my video, trying to establish? What is the main idea? Everything in the poem exists in service to this. It is the most important thing to take away at first. So what is this poem trying to say? That's what we're trying to do. Line endings throw us off. So look, all the line endings are gone. I took them away. We just have words in a paragraph form to understand. Now, complex sentences with meandering antecedents throw us off. It's worth the time to highlight and underline pronouns, which we call these the referent. The pronouns are what are referred back to something else in a poem, and find the word they refer back to, which is called the antecedent. This sounds complicated, but it's not. So Mrs. Deacon teaches students. She is on camera. In that simple 2-sentence, Mrs. Deacon is the antecedent. And later when I say she, that is the referent, referring back to the antecedent. Why don't they just call it pronouns? They do. It's typically in the world of maybe in your foreign language classes or in grammar books from elementary school, they'll call it the pronoun antecedent and the pronoun referent. We've lost that language, and that's fine, except that it does show up in the AP Lit exam. So you want to get comfortable with using those words. All right, so here's the poem. The world's an untranslatable language without words or parts of speech. It is the world of untranslatable language. Is a language of objects our tongues can't master, but which is the language of objects. We are the ardent subjects of. So language of objects, we are its subjects. Objects, subjects. So we have to understand this. We're in the same sentence with it, but we can't master it. If tree is tree in English and albero in Italian, that's the act of trying to assign a word to something like a tree, is as close as we can come to divinity, the language that circles the earth, and which is that language of divinity. We will never speak. And by the way, there's the unit title, The Language Will Never Speak. This language that circles the earth, that we all live with, that we cannot quite explain. So I've tried to find all of those pronouns, which again is the referent, and then I've tried to go back to find what is their antecedent, what are they talking about. I understand the poem better now, connecting everything together in that way. So here it is written out. You can press pause if you are a little lost and look at how I've labeled those words. All right, so now we've got this poem and we're beginning to understand the connections in the syntax. Oops. So we have to stop and ask ourselves, what does it mean? What is the message or the main idea of this poem? So we spent some time in class trying to understand that. I'm going to give you a definition here in the next slide, but spend some time trying to think about it before you move to the next slide. So here's the poem back. And again, not really thinking about line endings, but they are back. The world's an untranslatable language without words or parts of speech. It's a language of objects our tongues can't master, but which we are the ardent subjects of. If tree is tree in English and albero in Italian, that's as close as we can come to divinity, the language that circles the earth and which will never speak. The main idea, the message here, that he tries to say is there is so much in our world that we cannot explain to each other. We cannot even explain it to ourselves. Words are constructions that can never quite capture the real thing. So that is the model. And you can pause and see if you agree or disagree with that message. That is the general idea I get from this poem, and it's the idea that inspires the unit. In fact, this poem is the anchor for the unit. So in class, we did this together practice, Waiting, with William Carlos Williams' poem, Waiting. And I just have a little bio slide about all the poets that we're going to be looking at. If you're watching this video, you weren't here for the in-person class, and so I'm just going to move over to the BGD and what it is you'll do to show me your understanding. We have two options for your BGD. And in your BGD for Mondays, we typically do grammar. We are doing grammar today, but it's all about identifying antecedent and referent, which is a grammatical skill. So you've got either this poem, How to Write a Poem in a Time of War, by Joy Harjo, or this poem, How to Write the Great American Indian Novel by Sherman Alexie, to choose from. And you might notice some similarities. You can choose to attack both of them if you like in your analysis, or you can just choose one. Either way, this is your task in your BGD. Find 3 lines of poetry, and you're going to look for pronouns or referents. In each, highlight the pronoun referent, or underline it or make it bold or somehow identify it, and then explain what its antecedent is. Don't just name the antecedent, explain it in each case. And then for a challenge, choose lines where the pronouns have some important message about ineffability, this idea that like we don't really ever know how to say what it is we truly feel, and try to extract that meaning, as is the case with what we saw in the poem Waiting. So if you're looking for a challenge, choose a line that's very important to the theme, and that way, as you explain the antecedent, you can also explain with a little bit more depth why that antecedent is so critical. So BGD, 3 lines of poetry, probably a sentence next to each line where you explain these things. And that's it.